tribal trails. The Son of God, He's near. He chose to walk with us these tribal trails. Tribal trails, tribal trails.
Now the whole world had one language and a common speech. As people moved eastward, they found a plain in Shinar and settled there. They said to each other, "Come, let's make bricks and bake them thoroughly." They used brick instead of stone and tar for mortar. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we will be scattered over the face of the whole earth." But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower the people were building. The Lord said, "If as one people speaking the same language they have begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and confuse their language so they will not understand each other." So the Lord scattered them from there all over the earth, and they stopped building the city. That is why it was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of the whole world. From there the Lord scattered them over the face of the whole earth.
Hello, welcome to Tribal Trails. Our guest today is Dr. Gary Parker of the Cherokee Nation. In a previous program, he talked about the Ice Age and how it fits in the history of the earth after Noah's flood. After the flood, the world changed dramatically. Mountains arose, deep valleys and canyons appeared. The water gathered in the deep places and the continents emerged. Weather patterns changed and different climate zones developed. Through the great climate changes after the flood, the Ice Age came up. Even though the continental land masses were not connected, ice bridges between them paved the way for humanity to follow God's commandment to spread out across the earth and to populate all the continents. But men didn't listen to God's commandments. They wanted to do their own thing. They wanted to stick together and build a great empire. They wanted to become an important and famous nation and to have power. So they started to build this big city in Babel with a huge, big tower. But God thwarted their plans by confusing their language so that they couldn't understand each other. As a result, they couldn't live and work together anymore. They split up into those groups that kept the same language and could understand each other. So, finally, man was compelled to spread out across the whole earth. In today's program, Dr. Parker explains how God prepared men to be able to live in so different environments like the Arctic world of Canada or the deserts of Australia.
Like when this happened at the Tower of Babel, we had talked about Ice Age even before. Do you think the Tower of Babel at the same time the Ice Age was there and this is where people migrated to different places?
It looks like it was near the peak of the Ice Age, and as the snow began to melt back, is when probably around the time of the Tower of Babel, it made it easier for people to migrate into more parts of the world, moved into new environments. And incidentally, the spreading of animals from the Tower of Babel is actually, you can see it on a visit to the zoo. You see animals, you can trace animal migration routes into different environments and different places. And that's kind of exciting. My wife did a book, I helped, but it was really her book, The Complete Zoo Adventure. And she shows how the animals, wind up in environments that are really suited for them because they were suited for it. God gave them adaptations that would suit them for this environment and then directed them in that way. And the same thing happened with people.
Yeah.
And so, you know, even take the amount of melanin in the skin.
Yeah.
And so if you have a lot of melanin and dark skin, you can tolerate, in general, a lot more sunlight, a lot more heat without getting skin cancer and all other kinds of consequences. Well, where do we find, you know, dark-skinned people migrating naturally? Now, of course, in the modern world, it's all influenced by commerce and travel and things like that. But initially, you know, those with more melanin, you know, were able to do well, you know, in environments that people with less melanin would, oh, yeah, I just can't take this anymore. I want out of here. Or, you know, get skin cancer and other kinds of, you know, just constant, you know, irritation problems. And so as they begin to migrate, you know, God gave them features that would suit them to live in different parts of the world. And that way he was keeping them spread out, you know, like that. And so the advantage of having more melanin in, you know, a sunny climate and all that is, you know, prevention of skin cancer and so on. But the advantage of having little melanin in the northern regions, where there's, you know, deficiency of sunlight and you have to wear more protection from the cold as a general rule, well, the body makes vitamin D using sunlight energy hitting the skin. And if you're really dark pigmented and live, you know, where there's not a lot of sunshine, you can be very vitamin D deficient. Some of the American Plains Indians actually did have some skeletal abnormalities that trace back to too little vitamin D in the diet. The Eskimo peoples escaped that. Many of them have a darker skin, but they also have a diet rich in fish oils that provide the vitamin D. So there are ways to, you know, get around that. And notice that God is planning things ahead of time. He's given a variety of features to suit people for a variety of habitats, just like he gave plants and animals a variety of features so they'll do what he said, multiply and fill the earth.
Then God blessed Noah and his sons, saying to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number and fill the earth."
DNA has really been used recently to help trace migrations of people. But actually, it's kind of fun. I haven't done it yet, but it'd be interesting to, you know, see what kind of ancestral stock you came from. And of course, what that would show generally is that people are people and they come from all over the place. But there are certain kinds of traits you can follow. And a lot of times it's for benefit. God designed trait combinations to suit animals for different environments, plants for different environments, and people for different environments. Part of his plan to multiply and fill, not just increase in numbers, but actually move into different environments, colonize all the different parts of the world.
Then God said, "Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God he created them. Male and female he created them. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth."
And it's just amazing. Of course, an extreme part of the world is a high Tibetan plateau, you know, where people live in oxygen. Most people would just pass out. They wouldn't be able to live up there at all. And there's some adaptation possible. I have a grandchild, okay, that's going to have a larger chest capacity and a higher red blood cell count than he would have if he'd stayed in San Diego. But he moved to Denver at a young age. And so he's actually going to have a larger chest size and higher blood count for that effect. His genes won't change in that case, but sometimes the genes give you additional benefit. And in science, there's something called hybrid vigor. And this is part of God's plan too, because a lot of times, contrary to Hitler and evolutionists, you know, they want one trait to be fit, you know, the champion. Well, God often makes a combination, a big A and a little a combination trait, two different varieties of DNA, better in some environments than either double big A or double little a, for instance. Yeah. And then of course they will continue to produce double big A's, double little a's, and the mixture. And so it keeps that variety going. God's the author of variety. Well, and so scientists have been able to trace back two people as a source of two genes that separately are okay, but in combination, they give a unique ability to survive in low oxygen environments that's more than just the increased chest volume and increased red blood cell count.
Lord of all creation, of water, earth, and sky. The heavens are your tabernacle. Glory to the Lord on high, God of wonders beyond our galaxy. You are holy, holy. The universe declares your majesty. You are holy, holy, Lord of heaven and earth, Lord of heaven and earth.
The evolutionists make a horrible mistake in trying to do this. They're talking about different peoples, Homo sapiens and Neanderthals, and as if they were different species, as if they weren't people. And yet they turn around and say they intermarried. Okay, it used to be they were our ancestors, and so on, but now they intermarried, and which actually is true because they were people all along. There's only one race, the human race, Homo sapiens. You can be short and stocky, a Neanderthal, or you can be tall and thin. You still Homo sapiens. You can have all this variation, and you can mix and match. People of different backgrounds will have different traits, that there's a synergistic effect, it's called, where two things working together have 3 times the effect, not just doubling the effect, but by working together, they give you an increased capacity. In other words, they build on one another to make something better than the two separately. And so it's like, multiplying the effect. So a good example of that would be high altitude life, okay? A bad example would be one that was hailed for years, and I guess it's still hailed as the only example of a, quote, good mutation, and sickle cell anemia. Well, that doesn't sound like, sounds like a disease. It is a disease, okay? But there are parts of Central Africa where the death rate from malaria is incredibly high. We forget in North America some of the torment that people in other parts of the world endure on a daily basis. And my daughter just got back from a mission trip to Uganda. And malaria is, just a horrible fact of daily life. And it's carried by mosquitoes. It's a little parasite, actually a little protozoan parasite. The mosquito injects into the blood. It gets inside red blood cells that's so teeny, and it feeds on hemoglobin. And you can't carry oxygen anymore. You essentially suffocate. But it doesn't like the taste of sickle cell hemoglobin. Well, sickle cell hemoglobin is lousy hemoglobin. It does a terrible job of carrying oxygen, but at least it carries oxygen. And so hemoglobin that the malaria germ parasite eats can't carry oxygen, doesn't exist anymore. And so if you have someone that's carrying one gene for normal hemoglobin, one gene for sickle cell hemoglobin, they're not going to be in the Olympics, okay? They're not going to be, really athletically inclined and super strong and all that, but they're not going to die of malaria. And so that single bad gene actually keeps them from dying of malaria, And the good gene carries enough oxygen they won't die from sickle cell anemia. Cool. And that's a good, no, that's not a good mutation. What's the price of that? Well, number one, half of their children can die, a quarter from malaria and a quarter from sickle cell anemia. That's too high a price to call that a good gene. And of course, a good hemoglobin gene would be better at carrying oxygen, not just distasteful to a parasite. And so it's a lousy example, but it will automatically build up in the population. And so there is, genes that survive show up more frequently in the following generation, even if all they do is keep you from dying of a disease. And even if that means half of the future generation is going to die of the disease or the bad gene, it'll still build up in the population. And so that's the bad news about evolution, not the good news. But that enables you to trace people. If you find sickle cell anemia, and doctors know that when you go into a hospital, they want your history. And they're not going to look for sickle cell anemia in a Norseman, or a Scandinavian in general. Unless they get some detail like that. But from somebody with Central African descent, and they're going to check that out right away. And there are some promising treatments coming along now. And you can use neutral genes, like percentage of A, B, and AB and O blood groups that follow people, but they don't affect your survival. In Australia, when you see lack of God didn't really design Australian convicts to go to Australia. That was their choice. I suppose it was better than rotting in an English prison. And so, as Ken Ham likes to say, the Australians, the European Australians were men of conviction. And but when they got there, oh boy, skin cancer is just rampant. Because they don't have just a little melanin, they have very little melanin, and no real protection against, ultraviolet hitting the skin and stimulating cancerous changes. And so I was riding a big, long airline flight in Australia between two guys talking about their skin cancer and how they had things removed, and one guy had lost most of his throat and all this, and I assume it's not a catching disease, I'm hoping. And so what they can't, in this case, they have to take other action. And so little kids in kindergarten, wear hats and with something down the back of the neck, and they got to bundle up or you don't get to go out for playtime at kindergarten. And they use sunscreen lavishly and all that kind of stuff. And so that helps. But that was an artificial environment. God actually created patterns that enable people to move into different environments. Interestingly enough, Darwin missed the real point, although Darwinists missed it even worse with Darwin's finches. And so just about every school kid knows that there's some islands out in the Pacific, off South America, where there are finches with big beaks and finches with little beaks and finches with medium-sized beaks. And they're called Darwin's finches, although Darwin didn't make that big a deal out of them, but he did collect them. And he did notice that the finches with the big beaks lived on islands where there were lots of seeds to eat, and they had a muscular beak that could crush the seeds. The finches with the little beaks lived on islands where there were lots of insects to catch, and a little beak, they could move their head fast and catch rapidly moving insects. Well, how did Darwin explain the origin of those different finches? And the answer, straight out of the Bible.
And God said, "Let the water teem with living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the vault of the sky." So God created the great creatures of the sea, and every living thing with which the water teems and that moves about in it according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. God blessed them and said, "Be fruitful and increase in number, and fill the water in the seas, and let the birds increase on the earth." And there was evening, and there was morning the fifth day.
They were created to multiply and fill the earth. Only Darwin missed it. But not quite. He actually said, when I was sailing around the South American mainland, I saw finches, these little birds you can buy in a pet store. Some had big beaks already. Some had little beaks already. And he imagined a mat of vegetation washed down a river and out, across the ocean. And that really happens. And that's how a lot of plants and animals get distributed to islands. And so the finches would have gotten in the Galapagos as a archipelago, a whole group of islands with different environments. And so the ones with the big beaks survived where there were lots of seeds to eat. The ones with the little beaks survived where there were lots of insects to eat. And so it was created variety that he observed. They were already, the variation was built in ahead of time with that genetic plan that God designed. And then they multiplied and filled different parts of the earth. And so that's really what was illustrated by Darwin's finches. They didn't change and become a non-finch, or they didn't become eagles, or they didn't become penguins. And so, they were just finches, but they were designed ahead of time to live on different food sources, move into different environments. And of course that helps. That cuts down the competition, gets things to, that's how God directs the plants and animals to obey his command to multiply and fill, move into different environments. With man, he gives, instruction, but he does also give traits that are going to lead you. Some people are just not going to be comfortable in this environment. In there someplace else, and, and so they're going to take off and move. And then find the place that God had already designed for people with that particular trait. And so it's really just marvelous. And so often this trait is, hybrid, as I mentioned, so it doesn't breed true. And so you can't get a master race. And so even though Hitler was a diehard evolutionist and felt that, Darwin's survival of the fittest justified his attempt to establish a super race and to wipe out inferior races. Natural law was on his side. And so he, why else would he think he could conquer the whole world? He really thought, he was, he believed evolution to the extreme. And, but God made it so the hybrid is often, does better in a greater variety of environments, but they always have some of, double big A or double little a that will move into different environments. And that's just really terrific. God guarantees, in fact, I call it the law of conservation of variation. God designing things ahead of time so that no one of us thinks more of himself than he ought. It's kind of like the church. God gives different gifts to different people, and we're really only truly effective when you have a group of people each using their own different gifts to support one another in building the body of Christ. And that's just a thrill. I'm very conscious of all the things I can't do. And so I really like it when I'm working with somebody that has the gifts I don't have. They can do that, and then they can help me do what I do. I can help them do what they do. And it's not one's better than the other. No, we're all in Christ, and it's only together that we can, then it's that 1 + 1 = 3. You get benefit bonus. And so God really designed us that way.
It is really amazing. Everything that God created has a meaning. He works even through little details like the DNA. He made a great variety of animals and equipped them with different traits so that they can live in different environments. And in the same way, he equipped people in different ways to inhabit the earth with all the distinct environments. God designed this with different traits so that we could obey God's commandment and populate every corner of the world. And that's the reason why there is so many different kinds of people. There is no people group superior or inferior because of skin color or stature or anything else. No, it is all to equip us to be able to live in the places God has designed for us. In the same way, there is no single person that is inferior or superior. As Dr. Parker says at the end, we are all the same, but we got different gifts from God so that we could work together and help each other. In Psalm 139, David talks about how God designed every one of us individually.
For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place, when I was woven together in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be.
Did you hear that? We were already created in God's heart long before we were even born. And He has a plan for every one of us. He also has a plan for your life. Whatever you think or feel about yourself, God loves you, and He already has a plan for you. He already prepared everything for your life so that it could work out for good. He loves you so much that He died for you on the cross of Calvary. He wants to have a personal relationship with you, and He already knows you from the inside out. But do you know Him? Do you want to get to know Him? If you want to know more about God and how to really get to know Him, call us. We'd love to hear from you.
And He set my spirit free. Oh, He bore it all on the cross of Calvary. And through the storms of life, He moved the gale aside. And with His blood, we have life eternally. And when the great days come, then may He say, well done, I've struggled and fought that fight, all in Thy name. And teach me Thy ways, O Lord, remind me to pray, dear God, for one day I'll find Thy peace of mind. Show me the way. He reached down His hand for me, and He set my spirit free, and He bore it all on the cross of Calvary. And through the storms of life, He moved the gale aside. And with His blood, we have life eternally. And with His blood, we have life eternally. Eternal.